The Louisiana heat hung in the air like something alive, thick, heavy, and inescapable. Even at dusk, the cicadas screamed from the trees, and the sky bled orange behind the slow-moving clouds. Inside the Carter home, everything looked perfect. The white shutters, the trimmed hedges, the gleaming porch light that flickered on right at 7. From the outside, Olivia and Ethan Carter were the kind of couple people envied. 8 years married, financially comfortable, respected in their small community outside Baton Rouge. But what nobody saw was a silence that had begun to grow inside those walls, a silence that felt heavier than the heat itself. Olivia used to love evenings like this. She'd pour a glass of sweet tea, stand by the window, and wait for Ethan's car to pull into the driveway. He was dependable, calm, the kind of man who made her feel safe. But lately, that feeling had been replaced by something else. His late nights at work had become routine. His phone, once left casually on the kitchen counter, never left his pocket anymore. When she asked what kept him so busy, he'd flash a quick smile and say, "Just deadlines, Liv. You know how it is." She did know. She just didn't believe him. She remembered the first time she felt that cold flicker of doubt. It was a Tuesday. He'd come home later than usual, shirt untucked, eyes distant. When she leaned in to kiss him, she caught a faint trace of perfume. Not hers. The scent was light, floral, familiar. It lingered even after he'd gone upstairs. She tried to shake it off, telling herself it must have come from someone at work, but the thought stuck to her like humidity. Then there was Sienna. Sienna Brooks had always been part of their lives. Olivia's younger cousin, full of energy and kindness. She was the kind of girl who lit up a room without meaning to, and Olivia had always adored her. For years, she treated her like a little sister, inviting her over for dinners, holidays, even weekend getaways. But lately, Sienna had been around more often than usual. Too often. At first, it seemed innocent. She dropped by with a pie or a bottle of wine, chatting about her job or dating life. But Olivia began to notice things. How Sienna's laughter lingered a little longer when Ethan was around. How Ethan seemed to find excuses to help her with small things, like fixing her car or checking her laptop. One afternoon, Olivia walked into the living room to find them sitting close together, heads nearly touching over a photo album. They both looked up too fast, smiles forced. Something inside Olivia shifted. That night, as she lay awake listening to the ceiling fan creak, her mind refused to rest. She told herself it was paranoia. Sienna was family. Ethan was loyal. She was just tired. But deep down, a voice whispered that something was unraveling. Something small, invisible, and dangerous. The next evening, Ethan came home past 10, smelling faintly of rain and cheap motel soap. Olivia waited by the window, her pulse quickening as his headlights washed over the driveway. When he stepped inside, she smiled, soft but probing. "Long day?" she asked. He met her eyes. "Yeah, real long." He kissed her on the cheek, just enough to make it look normal, and walked to the living room. His phone slipped from his hand onto the coffee table. That's when she saw it. Sienna's name lighting up on the screen. Her stomach dropped. A message previewed for only a second before disappearing. "We need to talk." Olivia stood frozen in the half-dark room, her reflection faint in the window glass. Outside, the cicadas droned louder, as if the night itself knew what she was about to find out. The perfect marriage, the picture book life. Maybe it had already ended, and she was the last to realize it. The next few days felt like living inside a lie Olivia couldn't quite name. The house was the same, the tidy kitchen, the smell of jasmine candles. Ethan's coffee mug left on the counter, but something had shifted in the air. Every sound, every silence carried new meaning. When Ethan left for work in the morning, she caught herself watching the way he adjusted his tie, how quickly he pocketed his phone, how little he looked her in the eye. She tried to tell herself she was being foolish, but the evidence was everywhere. The late nights had become routine, and when he was home, he was only halfway there, his mind somewhere else, his voice distant. He'd scroll through his phone in the hallway, whispering, "Just work," before stepping outside to take the call. Olivia wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to. But that tiny seed of doubt had taken root, and now it was spreading through her like ivy on old brick. One night, she decided to test him. She asked if he'd like to invite Sienna over for dinner that weekend, the way they used to. Ethan paused for a fraction of a second, just long enough for her to see it. The hesitation, the guilt. Then he said, sure, that'd be nice. Too casually, too smooth. But Sienna didn't come that weekend. When Olivia texted, Sienna claimed she was out of town visiting a friend. Her message was polite, but it felt rehearsed. That's when the insomnia began. Olivia lay awake until dawn, the ceiling fan turning shadows across the room while her thoughts replayed like static. The perfume, the phone, the way Ethan flinched when she mentioned Sienna's name. By the fourth night, she couldn't take it anymore. She got in her car and drove. She didn't know where she was going until she got there, a small cafe 2 streets over from Ethan's office. It was late afternoon, quiet, and through the large window she saw him, Ethan, sitting across from Sienna. The two of them leaned close, faces tense, words sharp but low. Ethan's hand reached across the table. Sienna looked down, wiping at her eyes. Olivia's world narrowed to that moment. The street noise faded. The sunlight dimmed. Her hands gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles went white. She drove home without remembering how she got there. When Ethan walked through the door hours later, smelling faintly of cologne and guilt, she almost confronted him, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she watched him eat dinner, laugh faintly at the TV, and kiss her forehead before heading upstairs. When she finally checked his phone, just once, just enough to confirm the truth, it was locked with new passcode. Olivia stared at the screen, her reflection trembling in the glass. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled. The sound seemed to echo inside her chest. That night, when Ethan's breathing steadied beside her, she whispered into the dark, "Who are you really meeting after work?" He didn't stir. He didn't answer. But she already knew. The cracks had begun, hairline fractures spreading through the image of the life she thought she had. And once the glass starts to break, it never stops until everything shatters. It started with silence. Not the kind that fills a room after an argument, but the kind that settles in your bones. The absence of a voice you didn't realize you were waiting to hear. Sienna had always been quick to respond to texts, always the first to comment on Olivia's posts, always around. But suddenly she was gone. No calls, no messages, no visits. Days passed, and that silence grew heavier, pressing down on Olivia's chest until it was hard to breathe. At first, she tried to dismiss it. Maybe Sienna was just busy. Maybe she needed space. But when even Ethan seemed unbothered, shrugging off Olivia's concern with a flat, "She'll turn up," something inside her twisted. He said it too quickly, too easily. By the third day, Olivia's worry had curdled into dread. She drove by Sienna's apartment, a small beige duplex near the edge of town. The lights were off. The mailbox was overflowing. Her car sat untouched in the driveway, still dusted with pollen from last week's storm. Olivia knocked until her knuckles ached. No answer. A neighbor peeked out through the blinds, but quickly turned away. Driving home, she gripped the steering wheel, her mind replaying every strange moment of the past few weeks. The perfume, the cafe, the late-night phone calls. And now this. It was as if all those secrets had finally pulled Sienna into their center and swallowed her whole. That night, Olivia barely slept. She kept expecting her phone to ring, for Sienna's name to light up on the screen. Instead, the only sound was the slow ticking of the clock in the hallway, counting down something she couldn't yet name. The next morning, as she stood by the kitchen sink, her phone buzzed. The number was unfamiliar. Mrs. Carter? The voice on the other end was low, official. "This is Detective Raymond Holt with the New Orleans Police Department. Are you related to a woman named Sienna Brooks?" Olivia's throat went dry. "She's my cousin. Has something happened?" The pause before he answered was long enough to make her knees give out. "I'm afraid there's been an incident. Ms. Brooks was found early this morning near the Bayou Rouge wetlands." Her voice cracked. "Found? I'm sorry to inform you she's deceased." The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. Deceased. It didn't feel real. Olivia's fingers trembled around the phone, the room spinning around her. She heard Detective Holt explaining something about the location, the ongoing investigation, how they were still determining the cause of death, but his words blurred into static. By the time Ethan came home that evening, she was still sitting at the kitchen table, the phone lying motionless beside her. He walked in, loosening his tie, humming softly, and stopped when he saw her face. "Liv? What happened?" She looked up slowly. "Sienna's dead." His body went rigid. The air between them froze. What do you mean?" "They found her body, out by the swamps." Her voice was hoarse, shaking. "Detective Holt called me this morning." For a second, Ethan said nothing. His jaw clenched, and his eyes darted to the floor. Not shock, not sorrow, something else. Something darker. Fear. Olivia felt her heartbeat thunder in her ears. "Did you know?" she whispered. "Did you already know?" He looked up, his face pale. "No, of course not. How could I?" But his voice faltered. That night, the house felt colder than it ever had before. Olivia sat awake by the window, staring out into the heavy darkness. The cicadas had gone quiet, as if even they understood the weight of what had happened. Out there in the Louisiana marshland, beneath the hum of the swamp and the whisper of the wind, lay the truth, waiting to be uncovered. And deep down, Olivia already knew. When it came out, it would destroy everything. Detective Raymond Holt had seen his share of bodies in 20 years on the force, but something about this one unsettled him. Maybe it was the way Sienna Brooks's face still held a trace of surprise, or maybe it was the eerie calm of the swamp that morning. The kind of quiet that only follows violence. Her body had been found on the muddy bank, half covered in reeds, her clothes still neat, no signs of struggle, except for one thing, a faint bruise line circling her neck. It was no accident. Someone had wanted her silent. By mid-afternoon, Holt and his partner, Detective Mason Grant, sat in the dim light of the precinct, studying the crime scene photos. No robbery, Mason noted. No sexual assault either. Whoever did this knew her. Holt nodded and wanted to look clean. Too clean. They started with Sienna's phone, now sealed in an evidence bag. Her last calls and messages were all to one person, Ethan Carter. Dozens of texts over the past week, most of them unanswered. But the last one, sent the night before her death, made Holt pause. "We need to talk. I can't live like this anymore." When they ran Ethan's name through the system, it came up spotless. No priors, no record, nothing but a good job and a nice address in the suburbs. Still, Holt's instincts tingled. Nice men with perfect lives were often the ones hiding the biggest messes. The next morning, the detectives paid a visit to the Carter home. Olivia opened the door, eyes red and tired. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. "You must be Mrs. Carter," Holt said gently. "We'd like to ask a few questions about your cousin." She nodded and led them into the living room. Ethan was already there, sitting stiffly on the couch, hands clasped. He barely looked at them. Holt studied the couple for a moment. The distance between them was almost physical, as if guilt itself had taken a seat on the cushion between them. "When was the last time you saw Miss Brooks?" Holt began. Olivia spoke first, her voice unsteady. "About a week ago. She came by to visit, but she seemed distracted. I thought she was just tired." Ethan's turn. "Same here," he said quickly, eyes fixed on the coffee table. "We talked briefly. She mentioned some issues at work." Holt tilted his head. "Did you two keep in touch outside of family gatherings?" "Occasionally," Ethan said, too fast. That was all Holt needed to hear. He pulled out a photo of Sienna's final text message, sliding it across the table. "You want to tell me what this was about?" Ethan's eyes flickered. He opened his mouth, closed it again. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the slow hum of the air conditioner. Finally, he exhaled and said the words Olivia had been dreading. "I was seeing her. It was a mistake. It's over now." Olivia's face drained of color. The detectives exchanged a glance. "Did you end it before or after she said she was pregnant?" Holt asked quietly. Ethan froze. His silence said everything. By the time they left the house, Holt knew this was no longer a missing persons case turned tragic. This was a murder born from betrayal, and the husband sitting in that living room had just painted himself into the center of it. Detective Holt returned to the Carter residence 2 days later. The sky over Baton Rouge swollen with thunderclouds. The air was thick, the kind that made it hard to tell if the tension came from the weather or the people standing beneath it. Olivia opened the door before he even knocked. She looked pale, exhausted, but strangely calm, like someone who had already accepted whatever storm was about to hit her. "I know why you're here," she said quietly, her voice steady but hollow. "You found something, didn't you?" Holt nodded. "We did." Inside, the house smelled faintly of bleach and lavender. Ethan wasn't home. Holt set a manila folder on the table and slid out a single photograph. The belt used in the murder. "We matched the DNA on this," he said evenly. "It's not Sienna's. And it's not your husband's." Olivia didn't flinch, but her eyes flickered. Holt could see the weight of it pressing against her chest. For a moment, she said nothing. Then her hands began to tremble. "I didn't mean to hurt her," she whispered. Holt stayed silent, letting the words fall into the air like confession in a church. "I just wanted to talk," Olivia continued, her voice breaking now. "I found messages on Ethan's phone. Photos, things no wife should ever have to see. He denied it, of course. But that night, I knew. I saw them together at the cafe. I couldn't keep pretending anymore." She paused, covering her mouth as if trying to keep herself from saying more, but the truth was spilling out faster than she could stop it. "I drove to Sienna's house the next afternoon. I thought maybe I could reason with her, make her understand what she was doing to my marriage, to our family." She opened the door looking surprised, almost guilty, and before I could even speak, she started crying, saying she didn't mean for it to go that far, that she loved him. Olivia's voice cracked on the word loved. "I lost control. We shouted. She said she was pregnant, that Ethan was going to leave me. I grabbed her arm. She pushed me hard. I fell against the table. Then she came at me with the belt in her hand, screaming that I'd ruined everything. I just reacted. I tried to grab it from her, and..." She stopped, her eyes glistening. "It happened so fast. 1 second she was fighting me, and the next she was on the floor, still." The storm outside broke then, rain slapping the windows as if echoing her words. "I panicked," Olivia said. "I called Ethan. I told him what happened, and he came right away. He kept saying we couldn't call the police, that they'd never believe it was an accident. He cleaned the blood, moved the rug, told me to stay in the car while he took care of everything else. I didn't even watch where he went. I just shut down." Holt studied her face. Not the expression of a cold-blooded killer, but a woman crushed under the weight of what she'd done. "You understand you're admitting to killing Sienna Brooks," he said quietly. Olivia nodded, tears streaking her cheeks. "I know, but I swear, detective, I never meant to kill her. I just wanted her to stop." As Holt gathered his notes, the thunder rolled again, low and heavy. He looked at her one last time before stepping out into the rain. Outside, lightning split the sky over the Carter home. Inside, a confession hung in the air like smoke, fragile, poisonous, and impossible to take back. Detective Holt spent the night in his office long after Olivia Carter's confession was typed and signed. The storm had passed, but the air still hummed with its electricity. Her words echoed in his head. The trembling voice, the way she said, "I just wanted her to stop," like a prayer for forgiveness. He'd seen remorse before, but this was different. Olivia wasn't evil. She was broken. And broken people, Holt knew, could do terrible things when cornered. The next morning, the district attorney's office wasted no time. Olivia Carter was charged with manslaughter, a crime of passion born from confrontation, while Ethan Carter faced charges of obstruction of justice and tampering with evidence. It wasn't the outcome Holt had imagined when he first found Sienna's body in the swamp, but it was justice, or something close to it. When news of the arrest broke, the town lit up like a fuse. Local media swarmed the courthouse steps. "The Love Triangle Murder," one headline read. Others called it "The Cousin's Curse." Everyone had an opinion, about betrayal, jealousy, marriage, but none of them had seen what Holt saw in that living room. Two people drowning in their own lives long before anyone died. The trial began 6 months later. The courtroom was packed, humid with the smell of sweat and curiosity. Olivia sat at the defense table in a pale gray suit, her hair tied back neatly. She looked smaller than Holt remembered, almost fragile. Ethan sat 2 rows behind her, expression hollow, his once confident posture replaced by quiet shame. He hadn't visited her since the night she was arrested. The prosecution painted Olivia as a woman consumed by rage, someone who couldn't bear losing control of her perfect life. They displayed the photographs of Sienna's bruised neck, the belt, the autopsy report. They read aloud the text messages between Sienna and Ethan, the ones that had ignited the fire. "I can't live like this anymore. You promised you'd tell her." Olivia flinched each time her cousin's name was mentioned. When it was her turn to testify, she took a shaky breath and told the truth again, just as she'd told Holt that night in her kitchen. "I didn't go there to hurt her," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I went there to end the pain. I thought if I could talk to her, she'd understand. But it all happened so fast. She said things I couldn't unhear. I snapped. I didn't think. And when I realized what I'd done," her voice broke. "I couldn't face it. I called Ethan. I thought he could fix it, but he only made it worse." The courtroom was silent, except for the soft hum of the ceiling fan. Even the prosecutor, a seasoned man known for his sharp tongue, hesitated before continuing. "Mrs. Carter," he said finally, "do you believe Sienna would still be alive if you hadn't gone there that day?" Olivia's eyes filled with tears. "Yes," she whispered. "She would." Detective Holt testified next. His account was clinical, times, evidence, procedure, but as he described finding Sienna's body, his voice softened. "What happened wasn't planned," he said, glancing toward Olivia. "It was messy, human, a tragedy that started long before that night. After 7 days of testimony, the jury deliberated for 2. When they returned, Olivia gripped the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles turned white. Ethan sat motionless behind her, his eyes fixed on the floor. "On the charge of manslaughter," the foreman read, "we find the defendant, Olivia Carter, guilty." A low murmur rippled through the courtroom. Olivia didn't cry. She just nodded, as if she'd known all along this was how it would end. The judge sentenced her to 12 years in prison, citing emotional distress and lack of premeditation. Ethan received 4 years for obstruction and tampering. As bailiffs led Olivia away, she turned once toward Ethan. Their eyes met for a fleeting second. 2 people bound by love, lies, and loss. And then she was gone, swallowed by the echo of the closing door. Outside, reporters shouted questions at Detective Holt, but he said only one thing before walking away. "Some truths don't set you free. They just stop you from running." The verdict settled over Baton Rouge like a thick fog that refused to lift. By the time Olivia Carter was transferred to the women's correctional facility outside St. Gabriel, the public had already picked sides. Half saw her as a murderer driven by jealousy, the other as a wife pushed past her breaking point. In truth, she was both. The morning after sentencing, the Times-Picayune ran a headline that read, "The price of betrayal, a cousin dead, a marriage destroyed." It was brutal, but not wrong. Detective Raymond Holt kept the case file on his desk for a week after it officially closed. He'd solved dozens of homicides in his career. Cases colder, bloodier, stranger, but this one stuck. Not because of the crime itself, but because of the humanity behind it. Nothing about the Carters screamed murder. They were clean, respectable, picture perfect. And yet, beneath that veneer of Southern gentility, something had been rotting for months. Sometimes, Holt would look at the evidence photos and think about how ordinary everything seemed before it all went wrong. A happy couple smiling at a barbecue. A cousin laughing in the background. 3 people tied together by love, pride, and denial until it choked them. In prison, Olivia kept mostly to herself. The guards described her as quiet, polite, the kind of inmate who followed the rules and never caused trouble. She took a job in a library, read constantly. Old romance novels, court transcripts, even Bible verses scribbled on torn notebook paper. But every night before lights out, she would sit on her bunk, staring at her hands. The same hands that had once held Sienna's wrist, that had pulled the belt too tight in a moment of blind rage. Her counselor said she rarely spoke of the crime. But once, during a group therapy session, she did. "I wish I could tell you it was anger," Olivia said softly, her accent curling around the words. "But it wasn't. It was fear. Fear that I wasn't enough. Fear that I was being replaced. Fear that my whole life, my marriage, my family, was built on lies. And I let that fear turn me into something I never thought I could be." Back in Baton Rouge, Ethan Carter served his sentence quietly. He kept his head down, did his time. But when his release came 4 years later, there was no one waiting for him outside the gates. The house he once shared with Olivia had been sold, his job long gone. He moved to a small rental near Lake Charles, working odd construction gigs, avoiding the stares of people who still recognized his name. He wrote to Olivia once a month, letters that were simple, almost mechanical. He apologized, though never enough. He told her about the weather, about the stray dog he'd taken in, about how he still dreamed of that day by the swamp. The day everything ended. Olivia never replied, but she read every word. She kept the letters stacked neatly beneath her mattress, tied with a piece of blue string. Detective Holt visited the prison once, years later, for a separate case. When he saw Olivia in the yard, sitting on a bench with a book in her lap, she looked up and smiled faintly. He nodded, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something close to peace, the kind that comes only after the storm has done its worst. Sienna Brooks's family never fully recovered. Her mother stopped hosting family gatherings, unable to look at old photos without crying. Every Sunday, she drove to the small cemetery just outside the city and left white lilies on Sienna's grave. Sometimes she whispered to her daughter. Sometimes she just sat in silence. The inscription on the gravestone read, "She was loved. She was light. She was gone too soon." Holt often drove past that cemetery on his way home from the station. He never stopped, but he always slowed down, his eyes lingered on the rows of headstones disappearing into moss-covered trees. He thought about the irony. How love, the thing meant to bring people together, had instead torn these lives apart. Years later, when a young reporter interviewed Holt for an article about Louisiana's most haunting murder cases, she asked him which one stayed with him the longest. He didn't hesitate. "The Carters," he said, because it was about greed or money or revenge. It was about fear, the kind that hides behind love until it explodes. She asked if he thought Olivia deserved her sentence. He leaned back, staring out the window. "Justice isn't always clean," he said. "Sometimes it's just what's left after the damage is done." Olivia was released after serving 9 years for good behavior. She stepped out of the prison gates on a cloudy spring morning, wearing the same gray suit she'd worn at trial. The world outside had changed, quieter, colder. She didn't go back to Baton Rouge. Instead, she took a bus north, somewhere near Lafayette, where no one knew her name. That night, in a small motel room, she unpacked her few belongings, a Bible, a photo of her parents, and Ethan's stack of letters. She untied the blue string, read one, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to cry, not out of guilt, but out of exhaustion. In his final report, Holt had written a line he never meant for anyone to read. Evil isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it wears a wedding ring. The Carter case faded from the news, replaced by fresher scandals. But for those who had lived it, it never really ended. The swamp that had once hidden Sienna's body grew over with reeds and moss again. Children rode their bikes down the road nearby, unaware of the secret buried beneath their wheels. And sometimes on still summer nights, when the air hung thick and the cicadas screamed, people swore they could hear a faint sound drifting through the trees, the whisper of a woman's voice carried on the wind, saying the words she never got to say in life. I just wanted it to stop.